Question 50. If a group of texts is hotly disputed, wouldn't it be a good principle of interpretation not to allow them any significant influence over our view of manhood and womanhood? Similarly, since there is significant disagreement in the Church over the issue of men's and women's roles, should we not view this as having a very low level of importance in defining denominational, institutional, and congregational standards of belief and practice? As to setting aside disputed texts, this would be a bad principle of interpretation. First, almost every text about precious and important things is disputed in some way and by some Christians. Never in history has there been so much pluralism under the banner of the Bible as there is today. Second, imagine what it would mean if we took no stand on things because they were disputed. It would make Satan's aim to mislead us much easier. He would not have to overthrow the truth of biblical texts. He would only have to create enough confusion that we would put the important ones aside. Third, leaving Satan out for a moment, we are all biased and would very likely use this principle of interpretation to justify neglecting the texts that do not suit our bias, while insisting that the ones that suit our bias are crystal clear. This, it seems to us, is the Achilles heel of the hermeneutical approach adopted by Gretchen Gaberlein Hull in her book Equal to Serve. She takes one set of texts to be clear and undisputed, then takes another set to be obscure and disputed, and then says that the obscure ones should not have a crucial say in shaping our understanding of the issue. Specifically, she takes Genesis chapters 1 to 2, the examples of female leaders. For example, Deborah, Huldah, Miriam, Abigail, etc. The ministry of Jesus to women, the examples of ministering women in the New Testament, plus texts on the redemptive equality of women, like 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verses 14 to 21. And she infers that they clearly teach that male headship, in any distinctive form, is wrong. But all the texts in the New Testament that seem to teach an abiding role distinction for women and men, she says, are obscure, and cannot make their contribution to the shape of our vision of manhood and womanhood. In the following lines she illustrates her method in relation to the love of God and then applies it to the issue at hand. Everything I know about God indicates that he is indeed love, so loving that he came himself to die for me. Therefore, I put to one side passages like the imprecatory Psalms, or the Canaanite wars that I do not understand. But I do not throw out the known truth: God is love, simply because some passages about the nature of God puzzle me. So we should also treat the three hard passages about women. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 2 to 16, and chapter 14 verses 33 to 36. And 1 Timothy chapter 2 verses 8 to 15, which we find in the New Testament and which appear to place specific restrictions on women only. To these we could add Colossians chapter 3 verse 18, Ephesians chapter 5 verses 22 to 24, and 1 Peter chapter 3 verses 1 to 6. Therefore we may legitimately put these scripture portions aside for the very reason that they remain hard passages. Hard exegetically, hard hermeneutically, and hard theologically. In this way, very crucial texts are silenced by the governing theme of sex-blind egalitarianism, which is itself built on disputed texts. This illustrates the danger of a principle that says, if a text is disputed, don't use it. Our procedure should be rather to continue to read scripture carefully and prayerfully, seeking a position that dismisses no texts but interprets all the relevant texts of Scripture in a coherent way. And then we are to obey that consistent teaching. Now as to the matter of significant disagreement in the Church over the issues of men's and women's roles. We need to realize first that significant disagreement in the Church does not mean that the issue at stake is unimportant. The history of doctrinal controversy teaches us that very important matters, as well as less important ones, have been the subject of serious controversy. In fact, the length and intensity of a controversy may be evidence of the issue's importance. not of its unimportance. If we examine the lists of expected standards for most denominations, institutions, and congregations, we discover that some articles, perhaps most, were included because a controversy swirled around that truth, and a stand needed to be taken for the health of the church and the cause of Christ's kingdom. This means that many precious truths may not be included in our doctrinal and ethical standards at any given point in history, because they were simply taken for granted in the absence of controversy. For example, until recently, standards have not generally included explicit statements on homosexual practice or certain kinds of drug abuse. Most Christian denominations, institutions, and congregations have long taken for granted the primary responsibility of a husband to lead his family, and the primary responsibility of spiritual men to lead the church. Therefore, these biblical truths have not received explicit statement in the formal standards. Their absence is a sign not of their relative unimportance, but almost the exact opposite of the deep, pervasive, and long-standing worth in the Christian community. Thus, we have the anomalous situation today that institutional affirmations of faith and practice include some things far less important, we believe, than what is at stake in this issue. For example, we would say that the issues of infant versus believers baptism, of premillennialism, and of Presbyterian, congregational, or Episcopal polity are less threatening to the health and mission of the church than questions of gender roles. Moreover, not to take a stand on this issue in our culture is to take a very decisive stand, because of the relentless pressure for change that feminists are applying on many sides. Public advocacy on this issue results in so much criticism that many Christian leaders strive to avoid it. But there is no avoiding it. It is a massive issue that goes to the depths of who we are as persons, and therefore touches all of life. Our counsel here is not to set out a specific strategy to preserve God's gift of sexual complementarity. Rather, we simply plead for Christian leaders to awaken to the importance of what is at stake, and seek wisdom from above for how to act for the good of the church and the glory of God.